Good to see you tonight. Everybody have a pretty good day? All right. Now this is a lesson. Nobody goes to sleep during this lesson. They don't know what I'm going to talk about. But I want to talk with you tonight about a very, very serious and awkward subject to discuss. I'm going to be saying some things tonight that you wouldn't normally hear from the pulpit. But I think some of these are going to be basic to understanding what's going on with the porn pandemic. And when I say porn pandemic, pornography is rampant in our culture. There are 5,000 new porn sites that go up daily. That's your internet. That's your cyber stuff. 5,000. In the church, we have problems too. As a matter of fact, a Barna study done by a group that was affiliated with Billy Graham, that study found that 63% of churched men viewed pornography at least daily. I'm not talking about the world, I'm talking about folks that go to a church, not necessarily ours or the Lord's. 43% of women do. When that study was done a few years back, the women were going more to the chat room sites, and the men were going more to the picture and movie sites and trailers. But since then, there's been a little bit of a cultural shift, especially since COVID hit, and men and women together are increasing those numbers of going to actually all of those sites. And as a matter of fact, in sexual foreplay, many of the culture has shifted to where pornography is a part of the sexual foreplay, and you sit and watch a porn movie and then act it out. I talk to members of the church across this country, across the world actually, daily, if I speak the language. And what I find is the number one reason that members of the church want to talk to me is pornography. It is either something that is attacked the individual, or it's something that is discovered in the marriage. And homes are breaking up over issues with pornography. I talked with a lady today that wants to do an intervention with me before the week's over about her husband, that she found some very suspicious things out there about him. And we'll deal with that as the week goes on. But of course, the nature of addiction is when a person is confronted with a problem, the nature of the addiction is denial. Lying comes up as first. Oh, no, I don't know how that got on there. Well, that's the first thing that comes up. And so we have to break through all that before we can get down into the issues and the problems. Well, how do I turn this on? I get to be spacey. Whoa. That's way ahead of me. That's not where I start. I start here with this. Okay, that's halfway into it. Okay. All right, that's okay. You take care of that and I'll take care of this. How about that? Deal? All right, so we got a deal going here. When we look at the subject of pornography, it used to be that back when I was growing up, that we had like the sex magazines, the Playboys and the Penthouse and some of those others, and they usually were behind the counter or where little kids couldn't see them. And every once in a while, you might catch somebody that's got one of those. Or some boys would go over and they would find somebody's stash, and you remember those days? But anymore, with the advent of the internet, the cultural shifts in the 80s, where we started having R-rated movies on HBO and Cinemax and some of the other movie channels, and we started having that, then we started having a problem with people staying up late and being pretty sleepy the next day because they're up watching porn or the opportunity for porn. But that moved fast. And as the internet took on speed, then issues continued to arise with pornography. By the way, I have more letters after my name than I do in my name, don't I? Okay, all that means I passed a test or two. All right. A question is, where did we learn the facts of life? Now, I didn't say where are we supposed to learn the facts of life, but where did we learn it? When we ask people about that, and actually everything God made is good, our sexuality as males and females is of God, and everything God made, God said it's good. But what Satan has always done is taken what's good and made something ugly out of it. But where did we learn about the facts of life? Now, talking about sexual things can be very embarrassing and awkward, especially when we're talking with our children. And as a result, many homes don't have this as an object of discussion. And what happens in our silence is we give voice to Satan, and people have learned the facts of life from the devil. And it's no wonder that we've got kids, some 4 and 5 years old, in the church that are having issues with pornography and identifying themselves sexually. We have a number of people, young people in the church, that are, and I say a number, I hope it's small, but I'm afraid it isn't, who are having struggles with whether they're a boy or a girl, or whether maybe they like boys and girls. Our culture is being reflected in the church. And the sad thing is, we may not be talking about it. To the degree that we are silent on this, we are giving permission for the devil's cause to be promoted. Well, Satan has taken this and perverted it. And I want to talk for a moment about God's views on human sexuality. Now, this is going to be very rapid because I'm going to go through the Old Testament and the New Testament. These PowerPoints are yours. You can hunt these verses up. I'm going to reference them. But in the Bible, acting outside of God's boundaries for human sexuality invoked the death penalty. That's how serious God thinks it is to pervert your sexuality. The world doesn't think that, but God does. Incest. Leviticus, I'm in the Old Testament now, Leviticus 18. If a couple or people who are closely related engage in sexuality, express their sexuality one to another, the penalty for that was to stone both of them. Adultery. You mess with another man's wife, or another man messes. Anyway, you get people mess with each other. The penalty for that is death. If there was rape that went on, the penalty for that was capital punishment, death, unless it happened in the country and the girl tried to cry out and there was no one to hear her. Then she can go free, but the perpetrator doesn't. Whoredom. Here's someone that just allows her sexuality to be given to whoever will come along, or whoever will pay for it. And the penalty for that was death. By the way, when we read these passages about whoredom and that sort of thing, what age is he talking about? And I look today in our culture, what age are the people that engage in this? And what I find out, I'm afraid, is some of these are pretty young. That's who he's talking about. And people who are a little older can engage in that as well. Bestiality. Having a dog or an animal that is closer to you than a human, and you act out sexually with that animal. And by the way, some of that scares me because it's going on today. Bestiality. What happened is the person that did it and the animal were to be destroyed because the text says it is confusion. And God doesn't want that at all. Sodomy, that's homosexuality. And the penalty for that was death. Now I want to just say something here. Sometimes we single out one or more of these things, usually that we don't do, and then we come down real heavy on it, and we need to come down heavy on all sin. But in terms of homosexuality, sometimes we almost get that righteous indignation, well, that's an abomination. Absolutely it is. Have you ever done a study of the word abomination in the Bible? And if you start making a list of what's an abomination before God, you're going to end up with every sin in the Bible. It's all an abomination. Violating God's word is an abomination before God. Homosexuality is one of those things. Men burning their lust with men and women with women, doing those things that are unseemly, it is also called uncleanness. A woman comes to her wedding day and she's not a virgin. The penalty for that was capital punishment, kill her. Do away with her. Don't let her live in your culture. All of this was the breakdown of one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. Now, why was God so strong on that? You know, other sins people could pay penalties for, but not pay with your life. Why is God so strong on this? Maybe it's because that our sex drive is so strong that it can get out of boundaries very quickly unless there are strong deterrents that say, do not cross this line. Now, when I come to the New Testament, I end up with similar things. Matter of fact, in the New Testament, I go kind of beyond the actual act of fornication or adultery, and we get into the attitudes behind it. In Matthew 5, and I'm going to come back to this later, but in Matthew 5, it says, don't lust on a woman. And whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. And I'm just going to throw this in, and you may want to ask me what I think about it a little later. But some of our brethren are having a lot of trouble with this. And what they're saying is lust cause for divorce? And especially if we're involved in the pornography and the feeding of that lust regularly. Is that the same as cheating? I'll come back to that later, or you can ask me in the question period. Fornication is also condemned in a number of passages. Flee fornication. Every sin that man does is without the body, but the one that sins in fornication sins against their own body. That's some of these verses. Adultery is condemned, and that is the difference in fornication and adultery. Is fornication is broader and kind of covers the whole spectrum of human sexuality outside of marriage, and adultery is specific to married people and them doing the same thing. Lasciviousness. I tell you what, there's a lot of lascivious people today. I sat with a 14-year-old in my office this afternoon, and she wasn't dressed very nice. And she wasn't very careful how she acted. I did ask her to watch herself. But lasciviousness, what that means is inclined to lust. We live in a culture that says, well, that's not my problem if you're thinking wrong things. That's your problem. I'll wear what I want to wear. We live in a me society. But the truth is, both the man and the woman have a responsibility not to go around turning each other on. Lasciviousness is condemned as a work of the flesh. Those that practice that are not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. Galatians 5 talks about that. Now we have some terms in the Bible that kind of got lost in our culture somewhere. The Hebrew writer makes an argument in Hebrews chapter 12 that God punishes us, He chastens us, and it says, else were ye bastards. Well, bastard's an illegitimate child. But today we've softened that. We talk about baby mama. There are illegitimate children today, a whole bunch of them. And it's not particularly their fault that they're illegitimate. But Hebrews 12 means something. And what it means is that a natural-born child between a couple is not treated the same way as a child that's a love child. You understand what I mean by that, using modern vernacular? Whoremongers is a term used in the Bible. And what that means is guys that are going out trying to see if they can pick up somebody. Flee fornication. And then our passage we're going to look at in some detail as we move on in 1 Thessalonians 4, and it says that Christians are to possess their vessel in honor. Sometimes the Bible's real nice, but you know what that says? That part of you that makes you a female or a male, you're supposed to possess that vessel to conduct yourself with the honor that your sexuality deserves. It is not there to flaunt, to tempt, to entice, or seduce. We possess our vessel in honor. I'll talk more about that. Now, when I talk about pornography, I used to kind of really have it in for whoever was looking at the pornography. And I still do. But I have to ask the question, if this is happening in marriage, then what is not happening in the marriage? And when I ask people who are members of, and I'm talking about members of the church here, when I ask them about their sex life, and I do talk very plainly when I talk to people, and I ask them about that, it's like, well, what is your all's frequency of being sexual with each other? Here's what I get. 4 times a year, if I'm lucky. That's once every 3 months. We've got some people that are tempted to go to pornography because Satan has tempted them through their incontinency. 1 Corinthians 7 says, don't do that. One guy told me, once a year. Lady last week told me, well, it's been 6 months for us. Another guy says, well, on my birthday, if I've been good that year. We're talking about married couples, members of the church. And then one, I won't even comment on that, but one said, well, 4 times a day. I don't know how you get anything else done. And then someone said 2 to 3 times a week, except during her period. That's what's going on. And so while pornography is part of what we're talking about, we're also talking about that whole range of the sexual experience that is there in marriage. It is not uncommon for me to hear, I had more sex before I was married than I did after I was married. The truth is, you shouldn't have had it before. But you should have had more afterwards. We got it all backwards. We got this sexual experience all messed up. And what it's doing is it's driving people to look for alternative ways to fulfill their sexual desire. That's not right. But it's cause and effect. Let's listen to God on this. He says the works of the flesh are manifest. He talks about adultery and fornication, lasciviousness, And he says, those that practice such shall not inherit the kingdom of God. You'll go to hell if you do this. That's what he says. Now, why is God so strong about this? It's because he did not make us to be a bunch of rabbits. He made us to be human beings, not human sex objects. Romans 1 talks about those that are without natural affection. There's an affection that is natural, and there's one that's unnatural. And he says that some people have gone so far, they're without natural affection, and you know what the rest of that passage says? And for this cause God gave them up. That's the saddest thing in the Bible, besides hell. God gave them up to their reprobate mind to do the will of the flesh. They had gone so far that they're like Peter talked about, those that had eyes full of adultery and cannot cease from sin. They had fed on filth so much that it had become an intricate part of their thinking, their acting, and ultimately their acting out. You see, once we go down the road to sin, whatever it is, to sexual sin, there is no natural stopping place. Well, looking to lust is also talked about by God, eyes full of adultery. And then our passage in 2 Timothy 3:13, evil men and seducers. Stop there. What's a seducer? This is someone that's trying to line somebody up. This is a groomer. Somebody that's trying to groom a person, trying to get them to come across for them. What happens to them? When one has that kind of mind, they stop right there, right? No. They get worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. Now, I see that in pornography, where someone starts out maybe with the top exposed, and that gets them excited, and they view those pictures. But they don't stop there. Pornography is progressive. Sin is progressive. And where you start is not where you stop. And so we start with something that maybe is considered to be scanty clothes. And we move down the line until finally, as we continue to feed on that, feeding on filth, it takes more and more to produce the same effect. That's what makes it in the addiction category. It's the same thing as an alcoholic starts out with a drink, catches a buzz, but after a while that drink doesn't do it. So they go to more drinks. And then they change the type of drink that they do. And then they may mix it with something. It's the same thing, only we're doing it with the pornography in this. It's the same stuff. And then we find people, as Peter talks about, those that entice unsteadfast souls, those that were just coming out from bondage, and someone exploits the new Christian and entices them and pulls them right back into what the Lord took them out of. By the way, Peter talks about for whom the blackness of darkness is reserved. That's pretty scary. Job, in the Old Testament, made this statement. I guess they had this problem back then too. By the way, I believe Job was one of the patriarchs. His book kind of indicates that, but that be as it may. But Job said, I have made a covenant with my eyes, that I may not look upon a maiden. And the implication there is I don't look to lust and to sin. In other words, I'm in control of that. And I made the decision I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be checking out the women. That's what every Christian man needs to be able to say. We don't go around checking out the women, and the women don't go around checking out the men. You know, when I first started in this, I guess I was naive. I thought, well, men lust after women, but the women don't have a problem. It's like, wrong. I got around some women at work, and I heard them talking worse than the boys did. And it's like, well, I didn't think you all had a problem with that. Oh, yeah, we check out their rear, and yeah. One day I walked in, the women were talking about, well, you know, if you could have sex with anybody, who would you have sex? And they were naming different movie stars. And I'm looking at them, and it's like, do you realize, ladies, what you just said? You just said you'd cheat on your husband if you had the right hunk. And they got mad when I asked them, what does that make you? But I think it was a good question, don't you? There are 10 types of internet-related sex addicts. I'm not going to go through all these. There are some people that you want to be familiar with. One of them is Patrick Carnes. He's the one I reference here. And Patrick Carnes actually was I believe a Presbyterian preacher, and he was one of the first ones that came out and said, I have a problem with pornography and masturbation. And he wrote a series of books, a whole bunch of them. And he has an inpatient treatment facility for people that just can't get this under control. It's down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. His books, shadow is in all of them. Out of the shadow, beyond the shadows, living in the shadows, a whole bunch of them. Out of the shadows, or facing the shadows actually, is one that I use with my clients, and I go through this workbook. It's about that thick, and it has lots of questions, and it gets at the core of what's really going on with the individual. You know what the core is? The core is that most folks that are caught up in pornography began their pornography way back before they even thought about dating or getting married. When I ask, where did this start? I get people say, well, I looked at this stuff and played with myself way back when I was maybe in the 3rd or 4th grade. I'm talking members of the church. And I did that regular ever since that. And what I thought is, when I get married, this won't be a problem. But that's the devil's lie. You get married, and you realize you have rewired your mind to be in love with that passion, that pornography. And you've rewired your mind to use that to appease your anxiety, to deal with your depression, to deal with your anger, to deal with your boredom, and to just feel pretty good because you play with yourself. And what they don't realize until it's too late is that they have used that basically to self-medicate, and then they get married, and once they can have the real deal, it's not quite as exciting. And the wife often, or the husband, depends on who's been doing it, they don't have any idea that that was going on, and that actually they married someone that in their own head was already bonded to someone else, or a group of someone else. Now, when I say bonded, I'm talking about a chemical thing that happens when people release their sexuality in the wrong way. Not only do we release the sperm, the egg, we don't have any kids here, so I'm going to talk a little plainer. Not only do we release that, but we release something else. Phenethylamine, otherwise shortened as PEA. And you know what that is? That's the bonding chemical, and it's released in the brain. And when someone is out here having that intense orgasm to the pornography, they have bonded themselves to that pornography. What should have bonded them to their mate now has bonded them to pictures and to the fantasies. And then we add not just the phenethylamine, but the oxytocin. and that's released during high intense sexual experience. And those things together are what glue the man and the woman together. That's what seals a marriage where you keep coming back to each other. But we've released it in the pornography. It's scary stuff. Not to even speak of the endorphins and the adrenaline and all the other chemistry that goes into that, and that's been released on the fantasies, the pictures, and the self-satisfaction. And the challenge is to get that reeled in to where now the natural desire in marriage can be toward your husband or your wife. And I want to tell you what, it takes a while for that to happen. People come to me and they're willing to go through that process of trying to get it where it's supposed to be to start with. And they ask, Art, what do we need to do? I told a couple the other night, you need to be sexually abstinent, although you have a right to each other. You need to be abstinent for at least 6 months. And there's a precedent for that. 1 Corinthians 7. For a season. You all determine where the season is, but many people need to do a reset. Let me go there. People date. And when they date, what they do is often the dates get very sexual before marriage. When the sexuality turns on, the communication turns down. And now the object of the date is let's go do something, and then let's go do something. And then you have couples that they don't know each other. And so part of the corrective measure is to hit the reset button and say, we're taking that off the table right now. Y'all need to get acquainted. You need to get to know each other. And then sometimes I'll get those desperate calls. Art, we don't know if we can deal with this. You know, we're kind of a little bothered tonight. And what I tell them is, okay, you can have a recess, but you come back to school. And they'll tell me, we didn't know how much we missed each other. It's like, great, we're getting there. I guess recess works. Well, that's another story. All right. Patrick Kearns is one of the people. The other one is Mark Laser, L-A-A-S-E-R. And if you're out on the internet, you want to hunt up faithfulandtrue.com. And there you'll find some more workbooks. Now, Mark Laser is another denominational preacher that got caught up in all this. And he set up a series of workshops and has some workbooks. They're pretty good stuff, and they have Bible verses in them. You have to watch him a little because he's Calvinistic. But his wife also got involved in this because she was the betrayed wife. And let me say something about that, that when people are caught in pornography, there are other people in their life. And the betrayed wife has the betrayal has the same impact as if they had actually caught their mate in the physical act of adultery. It's the same impact, and it's the same recovery. This is not something, it's my body and I'll do what I want to, and it doesn't hurt anybody. This is something that hurts people. It hurts marriages. It hurts congregations. I've been to several congregations around the country, and I talk with brethren on an individual basis all the time, 10 to 12 a day for at least 3 days a week. And as I said, pornography is the main thing. And when I talk with them, what they'll say is, well, you know, we go to church on Sunday, go to service on Sunday, and you know, we act like everything's okay. Folks want to know how we're doing. We say fine. That's probably a lie. But then we go home and we're fussing and fighting, and she knows that I've been out on the web. He knows that she's been out here looking at sex toys. All kinds of stuff out there. The devil never ceases to be busy trying to pervert people. Fantasy sex. That's one type of the sexual stuff. People are caught up in fantasy sex is sex in strange places. Like the public bathroom. I'm not going to go into all of those, but there's a whole bunch of them. You can ask me about those at the end. Criteria that we look at on pornography is viewing for longer periods of time than intended. Here's a person goes on a site, they see something, they click, the next thing they know, it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Longer than intended. Repeated unsuccessful attempts to stop. So here's a person who says, I'm going to quit that. They may come forward a whole lot and ask you to pray with them for them, but they go right back to it. They can't get it under control, or don't. Irritability. When the internet's not working right, or a site's been shut down and they don't know where to go next, their favorite thing is not there. Escalating sexual behavior, acting out sexual fantasies with your mate, and you realize what we're doing is supposed to be about us, but there's somebody else in this bed with us, and it's in that other person's mind. Sometimes people commit illegal acts online. Lose relationships. More than one member of the church has lost their job because they're viewing porn on the job. One was out in his car in the parking lot, and a police officer walked up on him while he was manipulating himself. He was a deacon in one place. And we use all kinds of things to justify ourselves. It helps my marriage. Well, it's not real. Well, everybody does this. It's just a guy thing. Doesn't hurt anyone, not even me. Well, I can stop whenever I want to. That doesn't have any serious consequences. Why is everybody getting so bent out of shape about? And I'm just seeing what everybody's doing out there. I just want to go see what the options are. People who want to sin come up with all kinds of diversions. Do you know that viewing pornography releases in your brain the same chemicals that heroin and cocaine do? Now, pornography is not heroin and cocaine, but it releases, the brain responds to that in the same way that it does to heroin and cocaine, and that's what the sexual high is about. Consistent exposure to pornography can rewire your brain. And that would be very true to where a person prefers the fantasy over the reality. Those that are involved in this report a level of stimulation that is hard to replicate in real people. In other words, the fulfillment, the sexual excitement is more intense than if I was with a real person. Not much of a jump to figure out, well, why should I need a real person if I can get a higher high with myself? Study of young people between the ages of 10 and 17 concluded that there is a significant relationship between frequent viewing of pornography and sexual stuff and feelings of loneliness, major depression. I would add anxiety as well. There are 7 natural desires of every human heart. This is not about pornography. this is about what drives pornography. Every human being wants to be heard and understood. Every human being wants to feel like they are important, to affirm them, to feel like they are blessed, to feel like they are safe in their environment, to be touched and to touch, to be chosen or passionately desired, to be included. Those are the 7 desires of the heart. Here's what happens. When any one of those 7 are not fulfilled, there's a hole in your heart. Now, that's whether you're looking at porn or not. And that hole asks to be filled. People will say, I don't know what's wrong. I just feel so empty. My marriage feels empty. My life feels empty. And I use this. I have this printed out on a sheet, and I use it every day when I talk to people. And I ask them, where's the hole in your soul? And it'll be one of those 7. So I ask people, what are you doing to fill that hole in your life? And a lot of times what they tell me is they're running. They don't say it that way, but they tell me all the stuff they're doing to stay busy so they don't have to face that they're empty. It's pretty important stuff. I would ask you to look at those and ask, is there a hole in your heart? And if so, how are you filling that? There are positive ways and there are deviant ways. Pornography is a deviant way. Here's the addiction cycle. It's like a revolving door. We start out with the cravings, the tension, thinking about it, shouldn't do it, thinking about it, shouldn't do it, saw something I didn't need to, and now here we go. And so the visual trigger, or the thought, the stimulation. And then sexual addiction is about pain control. Something hurts. Maybe somebody wasn't very nice to me today. And so I want to go and self-soothe. I'm bored, I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, nobody loves me. And so we try to take care of that, and that keeps us going on this merry-go-round of the sexual stuff, and we take it to the fantasy. Now, when the fantasy starts kicking in, then we start releasing those chemicals that when I'm stressed, bored, angry, whatever's going on with me, and I release those chemicals during the sexual experience, and I release those, guess what happens? I don't feel so stressed. I don't feel so anxious. I'm not quite as angry as I was. What's happened? We have gotten addicted to our own body chemistry as released in our sexuality. And then we start trying to find a place to fulfill that. And then as we get to the end of this, it's like, I got to quit this stuff. And we make a vow and a promise we won't do that again. And then it starts back up. The addicted person is ambivalent. I'm going to jump through several of these. The impact of pornography to society is 86% of convicted rapists confess to regular exposure to pornography. 57% of convicted rapists tried to reenact the pornographic experience they viewed. The impact of pornography, it's degrading, devaluing the act of marriage. It's void of relationship. It thrives on sexualizing another human being and humiliation. damaging to marriage. I'm going to zip through some of this. These PowerPoints are yours. All right. Destructive to the user, loss of the family, loss of the job, increased incidence of depression, increases anxiety. Okay. Let's talk about the spiritual impact. As we've already said, God intended the sexual expression to be only in the bonds of marriage. Those are the only people that have a license to be sexual. You can't be sexual and be pleasing to God without a license. That's a marriage license. If you don't have a license, then don't do it. That's where flee fornication, all those verses come in. God intends us to be only in the marriage relationship, and their sexuality is not a selfish act. The purpose is to build up the marriage relationship. That's where that bonding and glue comes from, with the phenethylamine and the oxytocin and all those things. But pornography is a form of infidelity. It's betrayal. Not only is it a betrayal to the marriage partner, it's a betrayal to the perpetrator of it, because they have reneged on a promise not only to their mate, but a promise to God. Here's the promise. Present yourself, your body, as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12. It's an act against God. It's reneging on your promise that you made to God. I surrender myself, body, soul, and spirit to you. Only in this, I'm taking my body back. It's a sin against God. It's a violation of your marriage vow. It's a violation of your surrender. It is disrespectful use of your body. That's a temple of the Holy Spirit. It also devalues the seed of life that a man and a woman carry inside of them, and devaluing that seed. It increases guilt and shame, much like Adam and Eve that wanted to go hide after they had sinned. All right. Our passage in 1 Thessalonians 4, I told you we'd come back to it. Verse 3 through 6. Look at this. For this is the will of God. What is? Even your sanctification. What sets you apart? What makes you different from the rest of the world? This is the will of God. That you abstain from fornication. That's all forms of sexual acting out. That each one of you knows how to possess himself of his own vessel, that should say in sanctification and honor. All right, what are we supposed to do? Our maleness or our femaleness is to be held in that which is set apart. Set apart for whom? Set apart for God. Set apart for righteousness. That's what you're supposed to do. Here's what you're not supposed to do. Not in the passion of lust, even as the Gentiles or heathens who don't know God. That's what you don't do. Well, that's what folks call it in pornography. That's exactly what they do. And God says, don't do that. That no man transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all these things, as we forewarned you. And what that says, that is a threat. God threatens you. And what it says is that God is an avenger. God will get you if you don't respect his boundaries. going to go sexually acting out, it'll come right back on you. Your sins will find you out. And don't come whining after that happens. God said that's what will happen. And he said, we're warning you just like we warned you before. It's another piece. Flee fornication. You know what that means? That means get as close to it as you can. Wrong. Flee it. You're sitting there watching your TV and some nasty thing comes on, turn it off. You got something comes up on your phone that shouldn't? Get rid of it. Someone says, oh, I have such trouble. I travel a lot, and I'm in hotel rooms, and there's TVs in there, and I'm alone a lot at night, and I have some problems. Well, guess what? When you make your reservation, ask them at the desk, would you remove the TV from the room? It won't be a temptation if it's not there. And you know what? They want your business. They'll do that. Talked to a guy last week. He said, well, I didn't know they'd do that. It's like, well, yeah, if they'd bring an extra cot in there or give you an extra blanket, they can take the TV and put it in the closet down the hall. You see, when people want to do the right thing and something presents a problem to them, they can figure out how that doesn't happen for them. Now, go to Matthew chapter 5. I want to cover this, and I'm aware of our time being tight. There in Matthew 25, what it tells us, you've heard it was said of old, don't commit adultery. But I say to you, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. You know the passage. That says don't look to lust. Don't be checking people out. Don't be looking up people's clothes. Don't be lusting after people. We know that passage. And then we move down in that context, and then it says about divorce is later on. That's the other piece of this sandwich. And it talks about that you don't divorce except for the cause of immorality. But I want to ask you a question. What verses are between those? And you know what's there? If your eye offends you, pluck it out. And if your hand offends you, cut it off. Cast it from you. You'd be better to be blind in one eye and not have one hand than to lose your entire soul in eternal torment. And I got a question. What's that doing in the middle of a sexual context? You did notice that's a sexual context. He's talking about looking to lust, and then he's talking about divorcing because someone's cheating. And in the middle of that, here's these. If I understand anything about context, context means something. I don't know that I could prove that he's talking about masturbation there. But I think he includes it. Because you can't masturbate if you don't use your hand. And you can't do that if you are having trouble or can't do it without your eyes, especially when it comes to pornography. If you can't control your eyes and your hands, you'd be better off not to have your eyes and your hands. Think about that. I think I'm not too far off on that one. Now, when it comes to human sexuality, sometimes people will say, well, you know, sex is something you do in the bedroom, and spirituality is something you do in a church building. No. Your sexuality and your spirituality are tied together. And 1 Corinthians 6 says that. it talks about the one that's bound to or bonded with a harlot is one body. But those that are connected to the Lord are one spirit. And I want to suggest to you that sexuality and expressing our sexuality as God designed it is a spiritual thing. I asked a couple the other day, they said they were having some trouble. I said, have you thanked God for making you male and female and giving you the parts that can satisfy each other? You thank God for that? Oh no, Art, we can't talk to God about that. It's like, really? Really? Well, you may want to rethink that. They're interlinked. When we commit our life to Christ and our body, we don't reserve our sexuality for ourselves. The word for intimacy I talked about a little yesterday. It's the word yadah in Hebrew. And it's used 940 times in the Old Testament. And 900 of those times it's talking about the bond with humans. I'm sorry, the bond we have with God. Intimacy. I ask people, how intimate are you? And they think I'm asking them, how sexual are you? I'm not. What I'm asking about is the oneness, the closeness, the connectedness you have with your marriage partner. And that's where I do a lot of my counseling, because many times people are not connected. They don't feel like one. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're selfish. A whole bunch of stuff in there. Strong connection here. In the midst, Ephesians 5, where Paul talks about, and we did this the other day, where Paul talks about the husband and the wife, and he says this is a great mystery, husband and wife being one. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. What is the mystery? The mystery is the intimacy. Just like Christ and the church are intimate, a man and his wife ought to be intimate. When you treat your wife right, according to the scriptures like we talked about yesterday, when you treat your wife right, it's going to be a lot easier for her to surrender to you in subjection. When she knows you have her best interest in mind and that you're looking for the ways you can please her, she in turn is going to feel comfortable pleasing you. That's the mystery. But it's not a mystery now because you know the answer to it. Too much material tonight. All right, let's wrap this up. The past. If we have been, before we become Christians, or maybe before we're faithful, and we have spent our time playing with ourselves, messing with our sexuality, getting it all messed up, can it ever be straightened out? And the answer is yes. But I want to suggest to you that we have in our mindset sometime that things with God happen instantly. And this is not one of those. God can forgive us. But when we have set down a trail, a pattern of living, it's going to take some time to override that. And so it's a process, not an event. Just like when Israel left Egypt. They left Egypt, but Egypt didn't leave them. They got out in the wilderness. Man, we're longing for the flesh pots of Egypt. We didn't have it this bad over there. Let's get a bunch together, and let's go back over there. Beg them to take us back. What was wrong? They were pulled back into the past. There is a piece of your midbrain, the primal brain, called the amygdala. And that amygdala remembers everything you've done, but it doesn't have a conscience. Conscience is up here. Which means if you ever did anything, your body knows how to do that. And if you have the right triggers, it'll trigger that. The thing that overrides it is your conscience, that you're trained to say, no, we're not doing that. That's your conscience. But your amygdala knows how to do everything you've ever done. And it has automatic responses. Now, if I'm used to responding this way to a thing, and I get the stimulus that turns that back on, then I'm going to be tempted, and I likely am going to respond that way unless I override that and say no. Reprogram. That's the challenge we have. So if we have opened the door, the Pandora's box, to pornography and sexuality outside of the bonds of where God put it, we're probably going to have a problem with that for a long time. But we can override it. And the Bible talks about that in terms of overcoming. We can overcome any sin by the power of the blood of Jesus. It'll take a lot of work, but it can be done. Oh, I've got so much more to talk about, but I'm going to leave that for now. Maybe someone is here tonight that would like to have some special prayers. You may be struggling with this issue, or you may be struggling with something else. Well, whatever your situation, if you need to have our prayers tonight and our help, I want to encourage you to come and let us help you. Come and let us be a part of your journey back to Jesus. We'll pray with you. We'll pray for you. And during the question and answer period, I want someone to ask me, what are some resources? If you'll keep that in mind, then I'll be done. But if you want to come tonight, there is plenty of help out there. And there's plenty of help in here. Once you start your journey, why don't you come while we stand and sing? Be seated just a minute. Do we have any questions? Don't be bashful. Snooze, you lose.
One thing I'd like for you to elaborate on, you mentioned it in your lesson about where, and this is something I've dealt with some through off and on through the years, about what Jesus said about an individual that looks upon a woman as lusted in the heart, and then sometimes when there's marital issues, the one spouse who's not involved wants to use this as a criteria for putting away your divorce. So if you could just speak a little bit, does that satisfy what Jesus said except for adultery? I know that's a sermon itself, but if you could condense.
Well, what you've asked me is for 2 articles on the word porneia, which is the word fornication. And those 2 articles are written by 2 different preachers, very scholarly, both of them. And one says it does, and the other said it doesn't. Many of our brethren, this comes up in several congregations, many of our brethren hesitate, and they say, well, if you put your wife away for that, then we'd have a exodus of divorces in the church. And I don't think we need to look at what the consequence of that is. We need to look at what the truth of that is. I'm not ready to say that a person is okay going to the judgment of the Lord having divorced and remarried because someone's looking at pornography. I do have struggles, and here's where the struggles are. The struggles are when someone is way deeper into porn than I talked about tonight, where they're going out online and they're taking their mouse or their cat and they're going to hotel rooms online and they're sexually acting out with each other and masturbating themselves while they're doing that. I have problems with that one. I don't know how much closer you can get to adultery. I do believe that understanding the sanctity of marriage and the place where God put it, that if there can be forgiveness and reconciliation, we need to make every attempt to do that, but it needs to be on both parts. I would never advise people that you can divorce and you can remarry for something like this. Divorce maybe, but not remarriage. I would never advise that. Now, people may do that, and sometimes people ask me that. Well, what if they did? And what's the status of the church on that? You know, are they adulterers? And usually where I end up with is that the individuals that are doing that have to be fully assured in their own mind, because I know what is not of faith is sin. I also know that we're to prove all things and hold fast that which is good. So I want to hear a person's defense of that. Not just, I met somebody and they make my toes tingle and, you know, we need to get married. It's not the question. The question is, can you do it in full faith, ready to meet the Lord on the judgment day, and feel like your answer is the right answer? So with where I usually end up with is that's going to be an individual decision. It's not one I'd make. But that's one of those areas that calls for an awful lot of study. And I know of some folks that have said, yeah, you know, this went on for years. He said he was going to quit. All he did is went undercover, and he kept doing it, and there was no end in sight, and I'm just done. I know some folks like that, and they remarried. And the brethren where they are had troubles with that. And in some cases, they withdrew fellowship from them. And in other cases, they said, it's going to be between you and the Lord on the judgment day. But that's one of those ramifications, that's one of those ripple effects that when people choose to do wrong, there are ripple effects that it can affect an entire congregation. And what do you do about that? Now let me hand it back to you. What do you think?
I agree. I'd be very uncomfortable feeling as if that's satisfying Christ's requirement that's adultery. I could not encourage anybody to do it. I think you'd be on very thin ice. It's just not worth risk. It's not worth taking that risk.
Mm-hmm. That would be the thing, I would think, in a similar category where if lusting is the same as the physical act of adultery, then is hatred the same as the physical act of murder? It's the same Beatitudes, same Sermon on the Mount. Now, we don't say, well, this person hated somebody, he's a murderer. We don't say that. But we're quick to say an adulterer, and that's because adultery is an emotional issue. I think they're kind of parallel. All right. Other comments or questions? And just because I handed that back to Gary doesn't mean I'll do that to you. All right. Now, I got something I want to say, because I don't want to leave y'all hanging. And that is that there are a lot of resources out there. Often when people come forward, as our good brother did tonight, and they say, I need some help, we kind of get limited on what we tell them. Well, we're going to pray for you. Well, read your Bible and pray. And those are right things. But we don't have to leave it there. Because of what I do, and I'm going to sound kind of commercial here, because of what I do, and I've talked to a number of men and women that are caught up in this, and what I know is that we are only as sick as the secrets we keep. If we allow this thing to isolate us, and we feel like we're the only one with this problem, it will grow and fester. So, what we have is with conservative members of the church, we have rallied several teams of people that have this problem. And they're willing to confess their faults one to another. 15 of them meet on Zoom every Sunday afternoon, and they support and encourage each other. And if you've got a problem during the week, they're all in this group phone deal. And if you have a problem, what you do is say, hit SOS. And what the phone will ring and say, I'm having a problem. I'm getting ready to get in the shower, and any time that I start bathing my body, it affects me. Can someone call me in the next 5 minutes? I'm going to jump in the shower, and I got 5 minutes because I'm expecting a phone call. Okay. And your phone will ring a whole bunch because these guys support each other. And the women do too. There are betrayal groups of women that have been betrayed by this pornography stuff. And these women, they meet. Fact is, we're going to be meeting probably in early November this year, right here in town. And the men that have the problem with pornography, we're going to be meeting. There'll be about 30 of them there. They're all conservative members of the church from all over the country. We will have another one about a week later for the wives or the women who have been impacted by this. Make no mistake about it. The women are hurt as bad as the men on this. You've been cheated on. You've been betrayed. You don't know who this guy is. I hear it all the time. So there are groups like that. Other groups, there are some secular groups in town. One of those, I think I passed on 25th Street here. It says Celebrate Recovery. I know I did. It says Celebrate Recovery. And that group meets, I think it said Thursdays. And Celebrate Recovery is a group of people who are recovering from different things. That usually meets in church buildings. If you have a problem with that, you'll need to deal with your conscience on that. But what it is, it's a program that Celebrate Recovery is. If you have an alcohol problem, a drug problem, if you have pornography problem, whatever. And what you'll find is anymore, about half the people there have pornography or betrayal problem. And these people get together and they talk about that and talk about what they're doing about that and what's worked for them this week and any particular temptations. So we have the phone contacts. That's there. I can give you some numbers. Men who have told me if anyone's needing help with this, give them my number. I can give you those numbers tonight. The point is, you don't have to suffer out there by yourself. There are some congregations, like the one over in Kettering. They just moved, and so it's called Cornerstone now. They got another building. And there are brethren over there that are forming a group of men that battle against this topic. And they meet regularly. And they talk about kind of some of the stuff that got them there, some of their childhood stuff. It's not a therapy group, it's a support group. And so brethren are doing this. They're doing it more and more. And I really encourage that. I think this is part of confessing our faults one to another and praying one for another. It goes beyond we're praying for you and read your Bible. And what it says is you need the fellowship of people who are on the same journey to overcome the same problem. You need that fellowship. That's the third component. And I'm afraid that's what we've missed along the line in the Lord's church. And people ask for help, and the next day it's just like they didn't ask for any help. Fellowship. Okay? If you'll see me, I'll give you some phone numbers. And Gary, if you want those, these guys are fine with you passing those on. But I want to say that. This sounds very commercial, and it is. Leaving the Pit Behind is the organization that I started. And there are all kinds of seminars out there. There's an all-day seminar, several all-day seminars on pornography, on betrayal, on anxiety and depression. They're all out there. I'm not the only speaker. We've had a number of professionals that have come in. And so we've got all that out there. And actually, it's free. So all you got to do is click in there. You will have to sign up because we don't let just anybody in there. We don't want anybody in there messing up our site. But if you'll go in there, sign up, then I'll tell Luke to let you in, and you're good. You can look at all that stuff you want to, as much as you want to. Okay? You don't have to suffer alone. The other thing is a group called SA, which is Sex Addicts Anonymous. And it's kind of like AA, only it really is focused on the sexual stuff. Now, there is a member of the church down in Brentwood in the Nashville area, and he's one of the national speakers on SA. And there is an institutional brother out in Memphis, and he does all kinds of recovery work. So we're not without resources. We just haven't made those resources as known as they need to be. But if you're looking for help on anything, then I can help you with that. And most of these have Bible verses with them. Actually, the 12 steps originally had Bible verses. Okay. All right. Is that it?
Unless there's other questions.